Welcome to the ZNL Podcast, a podcast brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
Hello and welcome to this episode of ZNL. I'm very excited today. We have a special guest, Catherine Ray. Catherine has extensive experience and has actually worked in the Commission in communication, and she has recently embarked on a podcasting journey. So she has started a podcast. So welcome to the show, Catherine. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, very excited. We've had several conversations recently around the topic of influence, podcasting, digital channels. But before we go to that, I want to ask you a little bit about your own personal journey. So you've worked for quite a while at the European Commission. And you're obviously podcasting around the topic of the EU. So first of all, what attracted you to the EU institutions?
Well, I'm one of these passionate about the EU integration, EU project. I'm a bit of the older generation because I'm already 50. So when I started, the EU integration project was, I would say, the after the laws time. So still in his up and running with his hectic moments, but I was really believing in this level of governance and in this integration idea. So I came here as a militant, as we say in French, kind of activist for the EU cause. And first, I wanted to join the parliament because I was a federalist and I really wanted to work for the institution representing the people, and that's where I started. And then I completely entered in the communication and press relation environment jobs by coincidence, by chance. That was the first job that I was offered. I had no clue about it. I had never learned communication, press relation. That's not what you are taught when you are in the College of Europe or political sciences studies at the time. And I think that was a mistake. It was really missing because it's an important part of a number of people working in the EU bubble. So I embarked in this job of press relations, and it turned out that I really enjoyed it. I really liked working with the journalists, explaining what we were doing, how it worked. And then my career led me to the Commission, where I worked for Pascal Lamy first when he was trade commissioner. And then I became spokesperson for a number of commissioners, and I ended up with the IREP Federica Mogherini on foreign affairs. So I would say that was kind of a political will for me to work for EU. And the Commission came after the Parliament. And I must say that, yeah, I understood that was maybe, the engine of the European integration.
Now, a lot of people, I'm similar age as yours. I think there was a very optimistic moment for the EU and the integration phase. Obviously, we've had Brexit since, we've had a lot of challenges. I also feel, looking around Brussels and hearing people, that there's a lot of disillusionment with the EU project. Have you experienced that? Are you still as passionate as you were when you started, or how do you feel about the project? Are you still a believer? I guess you are to some degree, but do you feel that disillusionment, and how are you experiencing that personally?
Well, what's interesting is that having been in the EU affairs for now 25 years, I can see that every moment was a crisis moment. I don't know how many times I've been writing this sentence. Europe is at a milestone. We're in a crisis moment. It's a defining moment. It's a now or never moment. So it's always been the case, and we always had people unhappy. But that being said, obviously, as time went, I would say we kind of lived through different moments of support to the EU integration by the citizens. Historically speaking, I guess at the very beginning of the European construction, people didn't really care. They were trusting what this kind of elite was building. It was about coal and steel, so it was very technical. And I guess there was a kind of belief in union after the war. And then after the single act and maybe the Maastricht Treaty, some referenda started to be organized in some countries. The competencies of the EU got more political issues. So I very much concerned, but concerned, sorry, in the French sense, it's about us, but we don't really understand what you're doing. So, the EU institution started to be more and more challenged and to be transparent, to communicate. So I think it's important to remember that as well. Now it's true that we are at a moment, I would say that yesterday's crisis now seems for me extremely minor compared to where in the situation we are today. But interestingly enough, the EU support in citizens, the polls show that today the support has increased. And I guess because we feel that people feel that we are surrounded by, big elephants, and notably one who used to be an ally and who is no longer so, or is a bit more reluctant to be an ally, that I guess today we understand that it would be better if we stick together. And like the Union fait la force motto, I guess, has never been as true as today. So yes, I'm completely and definitely still an advocate for the European integration. And I'm using integration after having heard Alberto Alemano's speech where he says, I think after 80 years, let's not talk any longer about the project. The project is now launched. It's on its feet. Now it's about integration. And I find it pretty, interesting and compelling to see us as an integration of member states. So I remain strong advocate. I believe that what the founding fathers and mothers did was revolutionary at the time. And it's still true that we need, if we are not together in any case, we are much weaker. Now, I would say supporting the European Union integration is not about supporting necessarily our leaders, our institutions. We have to decouple, and we have to fight for the vision, for what we've built, and fight, with our political vision and motivation and beliefs. So yeah, more than ever.
Yeah, I mean, there is a European project that I think needs to be kind of redefined in the light of where we are today, because obviously things have changed. And I think it's actually about communication. Now, you said something very interesting. You said you didn't learn formally communication. I think that's the case of a lot of people, because at the end, I guess you learn on the job. So what did you do to learn your communication skills? How did you come about doing it?
That's a good question. I think I let's say I had a strong taste for media. For some reasons, even before working in the media environment, I knew the journalist. I was looking at the signatures, for instance, when I was reading an article, I was looking for the name of the journalist who wrote it. And I guess not everybody is doing that at the end of the day. I still have, I had some political sense, the sense of the story, of storytelling, which was a bit, as a character, temper. So, soft skills that I had without knowing that they were skills. So first I kind of built on my initial competencies, and then I learned it by doing. Really, I never really took a lesson. I learned it by working directly with journalists. I think they've been the ones who explained to me what they were expecting from me when I was a press officer. And I worked with people who were already experts, obviously, with senior professionals who would be mentors in this area. But really, I jumped in the pool. And I'm not saying it was easy. The first year was quite challenging, obviously, but this is the way I did. And then I went to work for, I would say, a private company working on corporate communication. And here I really understood that it was a proper job, and that there were things that could be sold, that there was a demand in this sector, and that the press release was not something obvious to do. And that there was some value in doing campaigns and this kind of stuff. So I would say in this company, I learned it a bit more professionally. I learned also the different varieties of area in communication. It was not only about press relations. It was much broader. But voilà, that's the way I did. And since then,
Right.
I must say, I had a class in the College of Europe, for instance. So I intervened in a number of classes of friends who were teaching on EU Commission, European stuffs about communication and communicating the EU.
Right. So you were one of our panelists at the EU influencer event where we were looking at the big trends in communication, and we discussed with Alberto Alemano and Dave Keating, what was happening to communication, what was the role of journalists, and what was the role of experts and influencers. And I thought you made some very interesting points about the importance of authenticity and storytelling, and some of the challenges that the institutions faced. And I just want to kind of ask you, having reflected perhaps on some of the things we talked about, do you feel, and the other thing that I think was particularly interesting was that we then had a following discussion with the Instagrammers, who are the new generation of communicators that you and I know. We've both also spoken to them on podcasts, and we've had their insights. So, and it comes back to the question about how Europe should communicate, who should communicate about Europe. So, what was your kind of takeaway on the big challenges facing, let's say, the old style communicators, and what the new generation can bring to this conversation?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of different elements in your question. So
Unpack it
forgive me if
however
I'm
you
getting a bit messy as well. Yeah, we were talking about learning and being taught communication. Obviously, between the time I started to today, I mean, again, the environment and what you have to do and your competencies have completely, drastically changed. When I started working, I guess, internet was there, but it was the beginning of the blogs. So you can imagine, far from the social media and the social networks. This came a few years ago. It's pretty young in a way, and we obviously, institutions had to adapt. We all know that institutions in general are not the most agile animals, and even politicians had difficulties to adapt because they don't really know how it works, and this is coming from the youth. So this is something that we all had to take into account. Observing it's coming also, it kind of popped up in a way. I mean, I would say the young generation took these tools and made it their playing field. So that obviously compels institutions to take it into account, and I believe they are still a bit, I mean, now less and less, but for some years they were a bit struggling in knowing what to do with this kind of newcomers in this communication game. Before, it was pretty clear. You had institutions communicating on what they do, and you had journalists who were reporting on what happens in Brussels. And in the middle, the normal citizens, I would say, the simple, or even the professionals in Brussels, would not really have a say or role to play, simply because the tools were not there. And today we have the social media tools, which makes that anyone can have a voice. Anyone can launch its own Twitter account, Instagram account, YouTube, TikTok, and just say what he wants to say. So this has obviously, as in any kind of innovation, its pros and cons. But I would tend to say that for me, I find it extremely useful, interesting, because it forces everybody to be more modern, to really try to really reach out on EU topics. So I was very happy to meet these EU influencers, because I believe that we need to flood the social media, social networks with EU content, which is correct, not fake, and provided with a bit of passion, enthusiasm, and a kind of personal tone. And I guess this is what works today. The young people wants to hear other young people talking to them, for a lot of reasons. And I would say maybe one of them being that they feel that these people won't try to manipulate them, won't try to sell them something. They won't use, or tailor, lines to take, or something a bit too conceptual. They will talk with a bit more authenticity, talking about this is how I felt it, this is how I lived this element, this moment, this experience. So voilà, these elements of how can it be said, authenticity, the fact that you can identify yourself, to the person who is talking, is super important. And even more when it's about European stuffs, which seems so distant, so far away from your daily lives. So I think they are very welcome.
Yeah, I think they're doing a kind of translation job of telling a story that most people really don't understand and don't feel is addressed to them, because a lot of
Yeah.
the EU level conversation is really targeting traditional experts, journalists, etc. And I think what's interesting with this Instagram feel is that it's a very different way to tell a story. You mentioned authenticity, and I think it's a combination of creativity, a form of authenticity, but we have information on any topic. I mean, on any side of any topic that's being delivered that way. I mean, how challenging do you think it's going to be for the institutions, for the politicians, to actually start getting comfortable with that language and those tools?
I wish I knew,
Mm-hmm.
the magic solution. I think that we have to consider that everybody must play its or her role. So if you're in an institution, obviously you have to be serious in a way, because your job is serious. You have to be professional. You have to deliver concrete and correct information. So after having spent a lot of years as a spokesperson of the European Commission, at some point I was really wondering, do we have to talk do we have to pretend that we are talking to the public at large? Because I'm not sure we are able to do it. We are a small institution. We have very few resources dedicated to communication. As a spokesperson, I cannot write a press release the way I would really like to write it, with very simple words, with maybe talking about laws instead of directives and regulations. But as an institution, I have to be precise. I cannot be legally incorrect. So maybe we should try to just pick at one key audience and adapt our message to this audience. And as a spokesperson, my audience was the press. It was not my cousin or your mother. You see what I mean? So I would say this is fine, as long as you know to who you're talking, because then you avoid mixing different tones of level of messages. Now, when it's about a specific policy, specific DG, maybe you can be a bit more creative, because here you will try to reach out to the public at large or a specific audience, specific sector. So I guess this is super important to know exactly who you're talking to and who you want to reach. The people who are the clother of European citizens in the institution are the representations of the Commission. I think they have a very important role to play. And first of all, because they can speak to the people in a country in their language. And this is for me a point which is really important. It sounds obvious, but when you are in Brussels, you all only speak in English, as we do. Although we are not all, native speakers, so it's kind of Euro-globish language. And how do you want Latvian person, Spanish person, French person to be able to understand what you're saying when you don't talk to them in their language? So I think this is a very important point, and we have never really found the way to handle it. So yeah, I will stop here. I don't know exactly what was the question.
It's very interesting what you're saying. So you're saying that there's a responsibility and a kind of frame in which communication coming out of the institutions has to operate. Now, if you look at what's happening in the United States and in different countries, obviously where there used to be official communication in that kind of control thing, those things have gone out of the window. And even institutions are basically just putting out memes and random tweets and things like that. So are you, I just want to challenge you to ask you, don't you think that it's possible that at least some parts of the EU, Commission, Presidency, Parliament, etc., should be shifting their narrative to a much more emotional, creative, engaging tone, even if, because the problem is people tend to be skeptical about a technocratic message. So I'm just wondering, don't you think that there's a need for a genuine departure from the previous approach?
Yeah, no, that's true. That's correct. As you said, now communication has always been, but now is even more about emotions. You have to create sympathy, empathy, fun, a bit at the expense of the credibility, maybe, or the seriousness of politics. But okay, that's where we are. And as you say, some politicians use it with big success. Now they have also allies and people who are multipliers. So yes, if you go on social media, you have to play with the rules of social media. So then again, you have to adapt your message. If you're on LinkedIn, you won't speak exactly with the same kind of tone than if you are on Instagram, and Twitter is, or X today, is another way of messaging. But if you go on this Instagram, for instance, platform where it's about young people, you have to, as a politician, you have to put yourself en scène, to mettre en scène. You have to, to show a bit of yourself. You can't only speak with an institutional message. That won't work. That could even be backfire against you. Yeah. So that's where I believe that MEPs are well placed to do that. They are the ones who must do that. Ministers in national governments, because again, they can do it in the language of their country, and obviously commissioners as well. And here, what is very, I think, interesting is that when you go there, you can't lie. You have to be yourself, and you cannot force yourself to be, cool or relaxed or fun. And I would say it's okay if it's not natural. Just be natural, whatever the natural is. And even if it's more serious, as long as people feel that you don't play a role, it's fine. You see what I mean? So we had some examples of commissioners who I guess were or are doing it I'd say quite effectively. I'm thinking about the former Commissioner Vestager, for instance, on Instagram. She would put herself knitting, she would play on this kind of little thing that she likes to do, which are a bit more personal. So it gives a bit of who you are yourself, not only as a politician. And it works because people like it. They feel that they're coming a bit into your intimacy, or that they know you better and they feel a connection with you. They feel that you take them behind the doors and that they can be part of it in a way. I'm also thinking, I don't know, Commissioner Breton, for instance, on Twitter, X, I guess already at the time, was publishing the list of songs accompanying each piece of legislation that he was promoting. And that was fun and that was interesting. That will make the conversation going in a more, light way. And that works. That works. People will remember that. I do remember that, I must say, more than a tweet or a press release. I'm also thinking today about Ajal Habib, for instance, who I think tries to be extremely dynamic on Instagram, taking the people with her during the big moments like the UN General Assembly, or doing bold videos like the one she did on the preparedness crisis package with the "What's in my bag" video, which had some kind of polemics, but on the other hand, people have watched it, and some countries, after having kind of reacted a bit badly against it, realized that it was super important. The message was really important, and it was a way for young people to watch it. So in this kind of moment, I think for me, it's true that politicians have to be a bit bold. You have maybe to come a bit out of your comfort zone. You have to play with this kind of game, simply because that's where the audience is, if you want to talk to young people.
Yeah, no, and I think you need to kind of connect your story to things that matter to you and that make you human, and you can't just fake it, and you shouldn't hide behind a kind of suit and a tie and a kind of podium and a very safe environment, which is completely controlled. I think this is the fear of a lot of people, is the lack of control you get by and the fact that you're kind of exposing yourself. By the way, I saw Commissioner Vestager on a plane. And she was knitting, so I have to say there were no cameras. This was a real thing. Now, this brings me to your podcast, Quoi Tu Sers, which can be loosely translated as "What are you for?" And this is a podcast that you launched recently, last year, and you talk about people in relation to the EU in French. So a lot of the things you said. So why did you pick that topic? What is your mission? Why are you doing this?
So I left the commission 4 years ago, and after a few few years to reflect a bit on what I wanted to do, I just realized that, as we said at the very beginning, communicating on EU, explaining the EU, was really what I liked to do. What is my mission, if you want to use like such a big word. And that I had been a spokesperson for a number of years, not by total coincidence. That was really something I enjoyed, explaining to journalists, sometimes a bit, being debating with them when they were not convinced, trying to convince people, to explain to them. But this time, after having spoken with on an institutional message, I really wanted to talk to the person. I hate to say the normal person, but someone who is not in the bubble, someone who doesn't know about EU affairs. I'm coming from a family who is not at all in this kind of environment, and I wanted them to understand what I was doing, like for real, not just words that I would tell them, but they would pretend and they would say, okay, maybe. So I really wanted to develop a product which would be very pedagogical, where I would use simple words and tell a story I would tell to some friends or some family at a dinner. So basically doing exactly the opposite that what I was doing before, allowing myself to use laws instead of directives or regulation, allowing myself to use images, metaphors, to talk about pop culture references, being a bit more fun, if I can say it this way, but at least talking like normal people do talk. So that was the idea behind the podcast. And I thought, okay, how can I talk about the EU without talking about politics, without going into these kind of things that you read in the media already? And I thought that talking about jobs and asking people to explain what they are doing at work would be a good way to open the doors of the institutions, of NGOs, of lobbyists, of journalists who are working in Brussels or Strasbourg or everywhere where EU affairs are done. Sorry, and you would meet someone. There will be someone behind the mic, like a person that hopefully the audience could think that, oh, the person is nice, actually. All these technocrats are not completely disconnected from reality, are not completely robots, as we have a kind of, bad cliche about bureaucrats. And I can understand what the person is telling me. So Europe is not only an elitist project, it's also something I can understand. Someone can explain to me, and I learn something, and I understand what the person is saying. So voilà, the jobs entry was, I thought, a good way to tell people come and meet us, so you understand a bit better what we do and who we are.
And how's it been going so far? I mean, do you feel that you've had surprising conversations? Do you think you're changing people's minds? Is your family now understanding what Europe is about? Are they listening?
Actually, yes. they are supporting. Yes, I mean, I had a number of friends and colleagues and families who were, forwarding the podcast to their own friends and family, and that's exactly what I wanted. That the podcast would be, forwarded to people who could be interested outside the EU bubble. I received a number of messages saying, "Oh, thank you. Now I understand better." I didn't know about that. I had no idea that it was working this way. Even my in-laws told me, "Wow, at last we understand what you're doing, the two of you, in Brussels," because the podcast takes the time for people to really decrypt what they do, to really take us with them on a routine day. It's not just a discussion in a bar where at some point you would stop because not exactly super fun. So I really have the time to set up and have the person to explain precisely what it is she or he is doing. Very interesting to see that it's not that easy to explain what you do, because when you do it every day, it seems like an obvious thing to do. But when I challenge, saying, "No, sorry, I don't understand. What do you mean? What is a press release? What is a policy paper? What is a negotiation with the parliament? What is a trilogue? These kind of things." And people always use concrete example on the legislation that they are working on or on a campaign they are doing. So the audience also learn about what the EU is doing. What are the competencies? But I don't tell them, I'm going to talk to you today about deforestation regulation, about wastewater, directive, because I mean, who would listen to that? But when they listen to the person actually negotiating this legislation, and they understand that wastewater directive is super important to them, simply because every day they drink tap water, they go to the toilets, they go and swim in the lake, you know, that connects, that relates to their daily life. So I would say it's working. No, yeah, the reactions are pretty good. Obviously, my difficulty is that the podcast has some visibility because I'm doing it on my own, and we all know that it's we have a lot of competitors there. But the audience I have is it's very interesting. It's very dynamic, and the people I eventually ended up targeting more and more are the students. It's true that I started by having an idea of engaging with the public at large, but I very quickly realized that, well, actually, when I was a student myself, I was passionate about what I was learning, but that was really theoretical. I had no idea about where this would lead me, you know, which kind of job I would concretely do. And I would have loved to be able to listen to this different panel of people explaining me, you know, what is to be an MEP assistant, what is it to be a policy officer, an NGO activist, or an NGO advocate, which is not exactly the same, a lawyer, a journalist, a diplomat, because you really see the different kind of jobs you can do in EU affairs, and it can also help you to identify what you would like to do, where you would be maybe good at. So that's, I would say, for the time being, today, the students are my most dynamic audience. Yeah.
Very interesting. And, you know, ask on the students, you know, I asked you earlier about how passionate or, you know, how do you feel about the European project today? And I feel that, you know, something that came out of the discussions during the EU influencer, especially with the Instagram panel, was a lot of kind of very enthusiastic defense of Europe, which, you know, I think if you look at the media, Politico, Euractiv, whatever, it's much more skeptical. It's kind of like, oh, you know, all these politicians, all this corruption, all this thing. And I felt we were hearing something that we don't actually hear in the media almost at all. A kind of people who are genuinely excited about Europe. We, you know, Kira mentioned bleeding yellow and blue, which I particularly liked. When you speak to students, do you feel that there is still a kind of Europhile passion out there? Or do you also feel kind of there is skepticism and disillusionment? What's the temperature that you're hearing from your conversations?
Yeah, well, my reply would really be empirical. You know, I cannot pretend to have scientific views of all this. My feeling is that there is still a strong appetite to understand, at least, what is it that we do. And that these students could be critical about X or Y decision, these or that politicians or leader. But I feel that, and the polls show that they are really conscious, aware that their future lies at this level, and that if we can't go forward together, that will be extremely complicated in a vast number of topics, started by climate change, which is still, even if we don't speak that much about it today, a huge challenge for the young generation. Coming to today's new important topic, defense, migration, all this kind of, education, all this kind of issues, economy, obviously. I think they are really aware that we can't handle them on our own. Mainly those students coming from a bit smaller countries, maybe, than France or Germany. So I don't know. Yeah, I just feel that they want to know, they want to be part of it, and that they want to integrate this bubble and hopefully continue to build it. Now it's true that the polls show that actually the young people today really are supporting the EU integration. But what is interesting is that there is some kind of paradox, because they are supporting the EU, but not for maybe the same reasons. We need to still find a new narrative to mobilize them. It's still a bit complicated to mobilize the young people. The ones we are talking about are here in Brussels, young professionals, and that's great that they are so dynamic and want to do something. But the young people in general, it's true that we still need to find a way to see how to mobilize them, I would say, engage with them, and be a bit clearer in what we do here.
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it comes back to the importance of communication and story. And what you said, which I think is incredibly interesting and actually really hard to understand, which is, the polls are showing a broadly pro-European trend, which, if you read most of the media coverage of EU stories, you'd have thought that we're kind of going towards some massive collapse of the parliament. The far right is coming. They're going to destroy the EU. The populists are taking over in every different country. And there's a kind of description of the world falling apart, of the EU ideas. And yet there's clearly, it's not that everybody, that the majority opinion is saying, oh, we don't want this anymore. But the question is, and maybe it's something you just said, is maybe we're lacking a clear and compelling European story. So coming to that, I mean, who should tell that story? Who do you think, where should it come from? Is it from the institutions, politicians, communicators? Where do you think that story should and could come from?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good point. I'm always extremely ill at ease with this kind of issue, that it's been years again that we are looking for the new narrative. I guess that was a word that I didn't want to use until now, until this question, but that we can't completely escape from. It's the word fear. But maybe it's me who is a bit afraid. I don't know if young people are afraid. I can feel maybe they are a bit about their own future, but it's terrible to say that. But maybe in a way, it's also fear, which kind of, suddenly make people realize that, hey, what's going on here? We could maybe lose this kind of project. And for me, I think we should try to shift from fear to real conviction, enthusiasm, passion, envie in French. And what I find very interesting is that I am always amazed when I look outside. I was yesterday in a big conference about EU, future of EU, etc. And there were some either candidate countries representatives who were invited, or some some people representing neighbor countries on the east. And that made me think that they are the one who talk with the most passion and the most desire about European Union. Those who are our neighbors, who are fighting, who know what it is to be invaded by a big elephant at their borders, and who would like to join us for our freedoms, our quality of life, our values. And I'm always a bit sad to realize that European Union citizens sometimes act a bit like spoiled children. They tend to forget how lucky we are to live in this big area where we can circulate freely, talk freely, be in prosperity. Even though I don't want to undermine and I don't want to. I know that we have a lot of challenges and a lot of problems, and I understand people skepticism or just anger most of the time. I do. But still, I think that, and the young people notably should really understand that what has been built is unique, and that some people outside are going in the streets with the flags, the blue flags with the 12 yellow stars, asking for this kind of values and model and model of society and quality of life. So we should not forget that. It's very interesting that for me, our best ambassadors are these countries: Moldovan, Ukrainian, Serbs, Georgian, this kind of, this country who would like to join us because they know what it means to not to be free. So that being said, there is still a new narrative to find. The peace one, I hope, can still remain, because despite the fact that we are not that much in peace as we used to be, and that obviously today the threat is extremely close to is at our doors. Amongst us, we are in peace, and it's a first for like a century, I say, first time. Yesterday, one of the young people who was in the audience said something very interesting. She said that today's young people feel more and more lonely, that there is this loneliness dimension in the youth, and that we have to find a way to explain to them that they belong to the European Union. It's a community. And I thought that was very strong, that when you sense you belong to a community, maybe you feel safer, you feel less alone. And I thought that was something interesting to dig into there, to tell people, we are together, we are a group, you're not alone. Voilà. And maybe that's one element, peace, community. And very interestingly, I was discussing with someone saying, at some point we changed the word. We called ourselves European Union before we were European Community. Maybe we should have kept community. Maybe it's stronger. Maybe it's more.
Yeah.
I don't know. There is more effect in a community than in a union. I don't know. But I thought, voilà, these kind of things are interesting reflections. And the last point I would say is to find, for the narrative, to find what unite us, what unify us. We have a lot of common points. We believe that we are very different from one country to another, which we are. But when you go outside, I used to work for the UN for 1 year. And I guess that's by working in the UN that I realized how European I was. Not even French, but European. And when you work in a really multicultural environment, really, international environment, you realize that there are obviously differences between a German, a Dane, and a Cypriot, but they are, way less important than between a French or German and a Chinese person, a Japanese person, a Peruvian person. So we have to also understand there are some elements, common points, and the most symbolic or iconic program in this is Erasmus, obviously. So, voilà.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you're as you rightly said, I think in storytelling and in communication, fear is a very, very powerful motivator. I mean, we've seen it in the US. I mean, the campaign that Trump ran was essentially on fear, and that's where he got most of the kind of support and energy. I think the question is, how do we make sure that there's a story taking place here in the EU that just makes the project relevant for young people and for the future? And I think it also means a different language, because what we're hearing out of the Commission a lot of the time still feels very dispassionate, very technical, with a bit of a high level message, but you don't feel it. I don't think people think, okay, there's a real passion here, which is where I think the younger generation of Instagrammers that we were talking to, I think they have a real potential of telling that story from their perspective. And the story, of course, is not just a story, it's also changing what maybe the institutions are doing. So I think this is a lot of very interesting things. And I think there needs to be a kind of focus, and hopefully some people will try much harder to break through and tell that story. And actually, what I want to jump to this, when you meet young people today and they come up to you and they say, what's your advice in starting a career or a project or a company in, let's say, communication? So what is your kind of basic recommendation for people getting started today?
Basic recommendations, I would say, what I tell them, be it in communication or not, sorry if I go a bit outside of your question,
Go for it.
Is you should choose a topic, a sector that you're passionate about, even if it's not fashionable. I remember myself when I was a student, I kind of censored myself. I loved topics like gender studies, human studies, not necessarily energy, competition, or this kind of stuff. But at the time, gender studies, for instance, were in France, there was no department of gender studies. It was still very American, an American kind of studies. And so I thought, well, this is not serious enough. I can't. And I think I was wrong, but because I was young and I was a bit scared of not finding a job. and now with the experience, I think that go for the topics that you like, that you really like. Don't pick something because it's just fashionable today. Tomorrow it won't be maybe any longer. So when you go in for a topic that you like, that you enjoy, you will be good. simply because I think when, as an employer, when I met someone talking to me with passion about what the person wanted to do, and not just lines to take, not just what I need to tell a future employer, you feel it, and of course you want to work with this person because, voilà, when you're motivated, the person in front of you wants to work with you because it's more interesting and more lively. If you want to be a communicator, choose where you're good at. Again, as a French person, I was always a bit educated as, you have to come out from your comfort zone. You have to work hard. It's true. But on the other hand, I realized maybe just go for a job where you're good at, where it's easy for you. Because if it's easy for you, you will be good. And then you can do the extra mile to be the best. But don't be afraid of what seems to you easy. It won't be easy for another person. So go for that. So in communication, for instance, I would say choose what you like to do. If you like to write, go for some kind of writing jobs. If you like to do videos, if you like to just identify what you're good at and what you like to do on top of a sector. And I would say continue to be curious, continue to update yourself, because communication as a communication sector is expanding and growing super fast. New tools are coming, like AI tools. So continue to train yourself. Don't take what you know for granted, and voila, and just meet people, talk to people. I think this is super important as well. This kind of connection and motivation by peers or by superiors, by learning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I do have a follow-up question though, and I hear this from time to time when people say, "But I don't have a passion. I really don't know. I like stuff, but I don't wake up in the morning saying, 'Oh my God, I want to be a painter or whatever.'" So, and I think this is and even some people who feel almost guilty because they see all these videos on TikTok or Instagram saying, "Oh, find your passion, do your thing." What do you tell people who say, "I don't really think I have a passion"?
That's quite interesting. When I'm talking about passion, it's not necessarily something that keeps you awake at night all the time. But even if you don't have a passion, I'm sure you have some centers of interest, or topics who are interesting you a bit more than others. Let's face it, if you want to be a communicator or working in the EU institutions, there are for sure, some areas that you're enjoying, because if not, just should do something else. I mean, for me, working in EU affairs is not like any job. You're still participating to a political adventure. So, voilà, you see what I mean? If you just want to have a 9 to 5 job, I think it's completely fine and completely legitimate. But maybe don't go in a sector which is about politics. I guess you have to have this kind of test in the first place to work here in the EU bubble, because if not, it can become extremely painful, I would say. If you're not a bit interesting in the area, because it's technical, full of people who are talking the same jargon, same language. So voila. So you see what I mean? It's not about having a passion, but at least having a kind of minimal interest in politics.
So you have to be a little passionate, maybe a little bit mad, and then you can find your thing. Okay, so now we have recommendations of the week in books and podcasts.
Recommendations of the week.
Catherine, what are your recommendations for our viewers and listeners?
Well, in terms of podcast, I would say mine. Obviously, I need to make a bit my promotion. I also like very much the podcast from James Cantor, which is called EU Scream, and which is about decrypting a bit the rise of populistic movement or thinking, or going a bit deeper in conversations with very stimulating guests. Trying to think again. I like also a podcast which is called Trait d'Union. It's in French, like mine. And it's a journalist who is explaining a topic, like every week or on a weekly basis, I think, more or less, on a very simple terms, so that people, again, understand what's going on, but on a topic in the news. In terms of movies, I'm sorry, I'm very French oriented in my recommendations.
That's fine. We like all languages.
I'm a big fan of culture. I believe very much in fiction, for instance, to create an appetite for something. So I'm always looking for books or movies or series about the EU. I would love to work on a series of EU, because I think that would help a lot of people to feel closer to the European environment if there was some kind of fiction around it. And so one movie which I pretty much liked was Une affaire de principe, and it's a movie which came out last year, no, in 2024, and it was inspired by the affair between Commissioner Dalli and the Tobacco Gate at the time, when the Commissioner for Health was pushed outside of the commission because he was suspected to be involved in some tobacco industry comment on dit, kind of
Corruption scandal.
case. And so they made a movie out of it, which is very interesting. It's about the MEP José Bové, who unexpectedly came not in support of the commissioner, who was an EPP commissioner, not at all his political side, but José Bové felt that there was something smelling weird in all this, and he decided to go and understand a bit better what was going on. So it's this movie shows this story. So it's very, very good if you want to understand a bit better how all this EU bubble works. In terms of book, you have Les Compromis, which is a book by someone working in the parliament and someone working in the commission, who did this very fun thriller-like book taking place within the institution. Like an MEP is suddenly found out dead because she was working on the Dieselgate, on the diesel regulation. And so the book, takes you within the parliament, the journalists, etc., the lobbyists, in a kind of light way, fun way, but again, a very pedagogical way to understand what we are doing here in the EU institutions and environment.
Fantastic. There's also the Parliament series, which has been recommended multiple times on this show, which is a comedy, but which people quite seem to like. And of course, you are also collaborating with the RTBF on some EU insights. So another thing. What's the name of that? It's a segment inside a show, or what is that?
Yes, it's in French we call it a chronique. We could say a column in English. So it's a column that I'm doing every month in a program from La Première, which is from the RTBF radio channel, and they asked me to come and explain to their audience where is the EU around them in their daily life. And I thought that was a very interesting and important point to show people that whether you like it, the EU or not, you have to know it's everywhere, and the regulation impact are around you all the time. So I try to explain to people, for instance, when you go at the sea, in a lake, when you go to swim, you can swim in these rivers or these oceans because there are EU regulations which are about cleaning the water, which are about testing the water. When you put a cosmetic, lipstick, for instance, or your cream in the morning, you have to know that because of EU regulation, you won't find some super dangerous chemical ingredients in your cream. When you go outside from your country and you can still use your chargers, because not the charger, but you don't pay extra money when you call one country to another. It's because of the roaming regulation, which is EU regulation, and you name it. So I try to tell people, you might not know, but the EU is around you, protecting you, giving you rights, and not only something complicated or negative or scandalous. It's also daily implications.
Fantastic.
And so last point, Compromis, the book has been written by the same people who are doing the Parliament series.
Oh, excellent. So we shall check it out. My recommendation this week is a book by Tom Holland, the podcaster from The Rest is History, and it's called Dominion, and it's actually the story of Christianity and how it's affected our culture, our values, our point of view. It's very interesting. It has nothing to do with religion. It's to do with culture and how culture has been incredibly shaped by this Christian narrative. But whether it's a Christian perspective or an atheist perspective, it's actually all being shaped by this kind of background. So quite very interesting, very well kind of researched. So that is all we have time for. Thank you so much for your insights. Looking forward to continuing our conversation online and perhaps in person. Have a fantastic rest of the week. Bye for now.
Thank you, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the ZNL podcast. Did you like it? If so, please share it on your social media, subscribe, and give us a comment. We will see you again on the next episode. Until then, remember, stay always one step ahead.